start with this. Well, Terrence Crawford very recently took to social media to react to this weekend's undisputed junior middleweight title fight the same way many of you did. He had this to say. He said, "I've been gone for a minute, but Twin Charlo, last night is the reason you're not on the pound-for-pound list, sir. You've got to do better." And this is likely in response to some comments that Jermell Charlo made about Terrence Crawford, his pound-for-pound status, and his quality of competition as of late. In other words, Jermell Charlo, he swung first. And this is Terrence Crawford's response to that.
Call it a professional rivalry.
You know, in hindsight, what resonates with me the most is that becoming a given weight's undisputed champion really isn't easy to do for any number of reasons. Politics among them.
Yeah, that can get in the way of becoming an undisputed champion.
Not being able to get the right fights due to the political boundary lines that determine what fights happen and what fights don't happen in the sport of boxing. Politics can get in the way of becoming an undisputed champion.
Politics can prevent certain fights from happening.
Becoming an undisputed champion, it's not easy to do. If it were, you'd see more undisputed champions across more weight classes in the sport of boxing. Now, politics didn't stop Jermell Charlo from getting the right fights in order to try and become an undisputed champion. It just so happens that all the world titles necessary for this endeavor were right there on his side of the street. So politics did not get in the way of the pursuit of becoming an undisputed champion. He actually got to have the right fights.
Politics didn't stop those fights from happening.
The unification match with Jason Rosario, this past weekend's unification match, undisputed title fight between Jermell Charlo and Brian Castaño. Politics didn't stop those fights from happening. Yet even then,
it wasn't easy.
It's not that easy. Not as easy as simply landing the fights. You then have to win them. And even then, it's not easy. I think that that's the lesson that this past weekend's fight should have taught everyone. I think a lot of people felt that Jermell Charlo would win the fight, and he didn't. In some people's eyes, a good number of them, he lost the fight.
Most people think Brian won.
But whether you think Brian won, or you think Brian lost, or you think the judges got it right and it really was a draw, regardless of how the fight was scored, the fight itself drives the point home that becoming an undisputed champion is not easy to do. And that's why, on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list,
so much emphasis is placed on it.
Unification matches en route to becoming an undisputed champion.
It's a year mark of excellence.
Taking on other world champions at a given weight, unifying titles en route to attempting to become an undisputed champion. These
kind of fights,
endeavors are not glossed over so easily the way they are on some other pound-for-pound lists by way of popular periodicals that are out there. Michael Monterio of Ring Magazine said, "I don't think either of these guys is among the 10 best fighters in the world right now. Very good fighters, but not quite on the level." To which Yo Mama Side Piece said, "Which is why the criteria is trash. Undisputed should take the most precedence," to which Michael replied, "I rate undisputed highly, but several factors matter in my opinion. Either way, neither of these guys is undisputed."
And he's not wrong.
Not on paper. In spite of the outcry from the boxing fans that Brian Castaño should have been awarded the decision, at the end of the day he wasn't, and he is not this division's undisputed champion.
And neither is Jermell Charlo.
Unfortunately, we didn't get that absolution this weekend, and that's the whole appeal of these kinds of fights, to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that a fighter is the number one fighter at a given weight and one of the very best fighters in the world. What we can say is that this past weekend's fight was a fight that was fought at the highest levels of the junior middleweight division.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
Fight fans are always asking for the best fighters to fight the best fighters. This past Saturday night, that's what took place at 154 pounds. The best fighters, two of them, the very best fighters in the junior middleweight division, met up and locked horns in order to try and become their division's undisputed champion. And I don't think that people should lose sight of that or rush to judgment, rush to criticism.
Based on Nelson Vasquez's scorecard.
I understand the outrage. A 117-111 scorecard in a fight like that does not adequately reflect the action that took place in the ring between those ropes with those two fighters. It really doesn't. So you can take issue with Nelson Vasquez's scorecard all day. You can take issue with it till you're blue in the face. But what you shouldn't lose sight of is that the two best fighters at this weight,
they did fight.
They wanted to. A fight like this doesn't happen. A fight like this doesn't take place unless there is a desire from both sides, both teams, both guys.
They even have the fucking fight.
Because the fight don't fucking happen if they don't want it to happen. You know, these two guys didn't have to fight each other. Either one of them could have decided to reign as a champion independently of everyone else.
The way Leo Santa Cruz did.
If they did, we'd be sitting here complaining about that. No. These two guys, Jermel Charlo, Brian Castaño, they wanted to know. They wanted to find out who is the best one among them. So they had the fight, and Nelson Vasquez's scorecard tainted the whole goddamn thing. It did, but we can't lose sight of the desire that was actually there. That desire...
That should be celebrated.
Jermel Charlo is being castigated by many a boxing fan right now because a lot of people think he lost that fight. And I understand that. But Jermel Charlo never had to have the fight to begin with. He could have approached the situation like his brother, decided not to unify with anybody.
Of course, Jermel Charlo's not unifying with anyone.
You can't get that guy in the same ring with Demetrius Andre.
It won't happen.
But at least Jermel tried, so... No, I'm not going to throw the whole fighter away based on one judge's bad scorecard.
That's not very objective.
And that in and of itself only compounds a bigger problem that we see in the sport of boxing, that it's far too subjective instead of objective. I think about Michael Montero's comment. I don't think either of these guys is among the 10 best fighters in the world right now. Very good fighters, but not quite on that level. I think about a comment like that, and then I think about the fighters. Brian Castaño, WBO champion. A guy who I told you, solid fighter. He's nobody's mug. He's no slouch.
Oh, he might have surprised a lot of people.
With how good he looked against Jermel Charlo. Unified Ring Magazine champion Jermel Charlo. It might have took a lot of people by surprise just how formidable Brian was. But I told you ahead of the fight.
I told you the guy's a good fighter.
And so is Jermel Charlo, because you don't get to become a unified champion if you're not one of the best fighters in the world. I mean, you don't get that far.
You won't.
I want you guys to think about what's being said here. And I want you guys to think about what that implies. You're telling me that a unified champion in possession of 3 alphabet titles and the prestigious Ring Magazine belt, this fighter is not among one of the 10 best fighters in the world, even though he's already faced several of this division's top contenders, its world champions.
He's not one of the 10 best in the world.
Jermel Charlo has the most complete body of work in the junior middleweight division. Those are facts. He's currently in possession of the most world titles, including the Ring Magazine belt, and he is this division's lineal champion. That's right. He became lineal champion when he beat Jason Rosario the fight before last.
Number 1 versus number 2.
What stands out to me is how fickle the fight fans are and how wishy-washy the pundits themselves can be in these same situations. I mean, you'd expect that they're held to a higher standard, but no, they're just as...
flaky?
I would have liked to have seen Brian Castaño make history for his country. The Argentinian boxing scene, which has produced many a great boxer over the years. I would have liked for that to have happened for Brian, and it didn't.
And that sucks.
And I understand that in the eyes of a lot of people, Jermel Charlo lost that fight. That is their opinion, and they are entitled to it. But when I think about that...
Opinions.
Should Jermel Charlo's pound-for-pound status continue to be subject to opinions when it's not an opinion that he's in possession of the most world titles at this weight? It's not an opinion that he, unlike Gennady Golovkin, actually fought for the Ring Magazine title. That's a fact. Gennady Golovkin was once ranked as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Not just the number 1 middleweight.
By Ring Magazine.
And the justification for this was his dominance at his prescribed weight. There was a time when Gennady Golovkin was in possession of just as many alphabet titles as Jermel Charlo, with the difference being that Jermel fought a champion for every single one of those titles. And Jermel, unlike Gennady, he actually fought for the Ring Magazine title, whereas Gennady got it after complaining.
Complaining about Ring Magazine.
He didn't actually have to fight for it the way that Jermel Charlo did against Jason Rosario.
They decided to just give it to him.
Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not telling you that Gennady Golovkin was not a pound-for-pound fighter at that time. I do take issue, and have always taken issue, with him being ranked as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter at that time. I don't agree with that, but I do agree that he was a pound-for-pound fighter at that time, and so is Jermel Charlo here today, because Jermel is in possession of the same number of alphabet titles as Gennady Golovkin was all those years ago.
And he fought for every single one of them.
Nobody handed Jermel Charlo anything. Nobody handed him a Ring Magazine title the way one was handed to Gennady Golovkin. You guys out there might be thinking to yourselves that perhaps I'm placing too much emphasis on alphabet titles, but it was emphasis on alphabet titles that got Gennady Golovkin ranked on the pound-for-pound list in the first place.
Because he never had much of a resume.
Never did. And in spite of not having much of a resume, Ring Magazine ranked him as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. The #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world.
Make it make sense.
The justification for this was his dominance as a middleweight and all of his title defenses. Defenses of what, you ask? Alphabet titles. Jermell Charlo's in possession of just as many alphabet titles here today as Gennady Golovkin was 2-3 years ago when he was ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. And I'm not telling you that Jermell Charlo's #1. I'm telling you that there's just as much precedence to rank Jermell as there was to rank Gennady. What are you trying to convince me of? That alphabet titles only matter when Gennady Golovkin is in possession of them?
Unifications.
Title defenses. I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion before I even say it, but Jermell Charlo is going to retain his rank on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list because the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list isn't subject to opinion. It's subject to facts. And the fact of the matter is, he still is this division's unified Ring Magazine champion. And you might be telling yourself, well, he's only this division's unified Ring Magazine champion because he got a gift on Saturday.
So what?
People said the same thing about Gennady Golovkin after the Jacobs fight. How soon we forget. After that fight, there were a lot of people saying that Jacobs had done enough to win the fight, that they scored it for Daniel Jacobs. Yet those people's anecdotal scorecards and their opinions, they didn't affect Gennady Golovkin's rank standing
On Ring Magazine.
ESPN, Transnational, or the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list.
He was still ranked as a pound-for-pound fighter.
You can feel that Brian Castaño did enough to win the fight. It's your prerogative, it's your opinion, and you're entitled to it.
You can find a bunch of other people that agree with you.
Take a poll. That's not going to change the outcome of the fight. That's not going to reverse the judge's decision. And if you take issue with the judge's decision, well, what's supposed to make your issues with the judge's decision any more valid than the issues people took with the judge's decision in the Golovkin-Jacobs fight?
How soon we forget.
There were a lot of people that thought Daniel Jacobs had done enough to win that fight. Yet in spite of what those people thought, that didn't affect Gennady Golovkin's status as a pound-for-pound fighter on several pound-for-pound lists, Ring IQs included.
What stock do you have in other people's opinions?
You guys only seem to factor in other people's opinions when it's convenient for you to do so. Did you factor in people's opinions when they said that Gennady Golovkin really lost to Daniel Jacobs and he got a gift?
Didn't matter then, did it?
Sorry to tell you that. It doesn't matter now. Jermell Charlo still is this division's unified Ring Magazine champion, whether you like it or not. And based on that matter of fact, he retains his #9 spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list.
Because the logic has to stick.
Because boxing's got enough blowhards with opinions that can't make sense of what it is exactly they're saying, what it is exactly that they're implying. You have to make it make sense.
Somebody does.
There's got to be some kind of accountability, otherwise you're just a part of the problem. I mean, seriously, what's with all the hypocrisy from these boxing scribes? It's no wonder that these periodicals aren't even held in the same esteem as they used to be.
Everybody knows they're just playing favorites.
You say that Jermell Charlo got a gift on Saturday against Brian? What a coinky dink. People were saying that about Gennady Golovkin against Danny Jacobs.
Did those opinions affect where you ranked him?
No, they didn't. Beyond that Daniel Jacobs fight, Gennady Golovkin was still ranked as a pound-for-pound fighter. You look on Ring Magazine's pound-for-pound list, they never even bothered to rank Jermell Charlo, who is currently in possession of the same number of world titles as Gennady Golovkin, having fought more world champions in order to collect them.
He's got more titles than Errol Spence Jr., too.
But you guys decided to rank him. Make it make sense. Or is it just that certain boxing scribes on certain editorial panels think that because they've got a hard-on for a guy, that's enough to give him a rank?
Tell me you're not playing favorites.
Go on. Make it make sense, because we here at Ring IQ stick to a governing criteria.
Always have.
Had Brian Castaño been awarded the decision on Saturday night, Jermell Charlo would have been out and Brian would have been in. It's that clear-cut, it's that simple, because the logic has to stick. But when we try to apply any discernible logic to a Ring Magazine's pound-for-pound list, for example, there doesn't appear to be any.
Just playing favorites.
The same way Joe Blow in his living room does on any given Saturday night. Except you guys are being paid
To be this sport's record keepers.
You say that Gervonta Davis's regular titles that he's collected at 135 and 140 pounds are not full-fledged world titles, thus, he's not a full-fledged three-division champion. And I'm in agreement with that much. But then why is it that defenses of a Reggie belt...
Why'd you guys count those for Gennady Golovkin?
For a time, Gennady Golovkin was holding the same version of the WBA regular title that Gervonta Davis is currently holding, yet when he held it...
You guys didn't keep that same energy.
Then wonder why the sport itself is rife with hypocrites that have agendas.
Seems like you guys have your own.
For and against certain fighters. This is the kind of issue that the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list attempts to resolve. The logic has to stick. The logic that applies to a Gennady Golovkin must then apply also to a Jermell Charlo.
Gennady was ranked for being the most dominant unified champion at his weight.
The same must then apply to Jermell Charlo, in spite of the outcry that he was given a gift on Saturday night. Hey, there was an outcry that Gennady was given a gift against Daniel Jacobs.
And there was an outcry that Canelo was given a gift against Gennady.
But that outcry was not enough to affect those fighters' status as pound-for-pound fighters.
Not the Ring magazine.
Not to ESPN, not to Transnational, or even BoxRec.
I'm sorry, we got enough wishy-washy boxing scribes in the sport of boxing.
I would have liked for Brian Castaño to have been awarded the decision and what that would have meant for him, his team, and his country. Having their first undisputed champion in the four-belt era likely would have meant more to the Argentinians than it would have meant to the Americans. And I would have liked for it to have happened that way, but it didn't.
A lot of people aren't happy about that.
A lot of people think he won the fight, in their opinion, but their opinions don't dictate who's a champion and who isn't.
They don't.
As big a pain in the ass as this might be, we have to abide by the judge's decision.